What is up, guys? It is Kitsus from Coasterland, and today we have part 2 of ranking every wooden coaster I've been on. We are going to be looking at numbers 74 through 61. After this, it will be completely, 15 at a time. It's just I messed up the numbering a little bit, so yeah, here we are. So at number 74, we have Predator at Six Flags Darien Lake. Now, Six Flags Darien Lake is not the best park, and this is not the best wooden coaster. Both are true statements. But, I mean, it was a fun, enjoyable ride at times, but it was also a very rough and painful ride at other times. Obviously built by the Din Corporation, which are not known for smooth, very great rides. So, I mean, it makes sense why it's the way it is. Obviously, with the Titan track now, it probably rides a heck of a lot better. But when I rode it, it was still all wood, so it definitely disappointed a little bit. I mean, I expected it to be bad, but it wasn't like terrible, but it definitely wasn't great, so it still was a disappointment. I mean, I will admit there was a couple moments of pretty solid airtime, which is surprising considering the Din Corporation intentionally attempted to design airtime out of their rides. Fun little fact, Charlie Din was a complete moron, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, he was a genius, but he was also a moron. I swear to God, it's just kind of like a mixed bag there. But, you know, obviously he was not the designer. I think it was Dennis McNulty that did the design work, but still, kind of not the smartest situation there. But anyways, Predator was alright. It wasn't perfect by any stretch of the measure, and it wasn't good really, but it was just alright. I mean, I've definitely ridden worse wooden coasters, as this list has reflected. At number 73, we have Thunder Run at Kentucky Kingdom. Now, under normal circumstances, this would be way, way higher. However, my most recent rides in 2022 were quite fantastically awful. Now, what I mean by that is, it's not a bad ride typically. Has some airtime, has a great pacing style with the turns being very fast, the airtime hills being relatively decent, but it usually was a lot smoother. 2022 rides were absolute brutality. I mean, I haven't ridden a ride on Thunder Run that rough, ever. Like, it was the roughest it's ever been. I mean, the first time I rode it in 2019, right? 2019? Yeah, 2019. It was bumpy, but it wasn't, like, bad. Then I rode it again in 2020, and it was quite good actually. And then I wrote it again in 2022, and it was brutal, absolutely brutal. So it definitely has some inconsistency going on there, which is fine. It is what it is. I'm sure that a retrack is all it really needs, to be fair, because a good retrack would probably make this much, much smoother and much, much more enjoyable. So I definitely think that's the route the park should go. And yeah, that's what I got to say on that. At number 72, moving on, of course, we have Tornado at Adventureland. Now, Tornado is a William Cobb designed roller coaster, and so far I've done two of his rides, Judge Roy's Scream and this one, and to be fair, neither one of them was particularly great. I mean, it just wasn't. It's kind of an unfortunate reality. Um, and it was kind of frustrating for me because I wanted to enjoy this ride, but it just didn't do anything. Like, it had maybe one moment of moderate floater airtime. It had literally like zero laterals, zero positives, barely any negatives. It just was overall a terrible experience. Not really because, like, it wasn't extremely rough. It wasn't smooth. It definitely was rough, which didn't help, but, like, it wasn't so rough that it was not bearable, but my point still stands. It was just not a great ride overall, and it showed in my review of it in the vlog from that particular park from Adventureland. And yeah, it was definitely an obvious situation. So moving on to the number 71 spot, we have the Underground, also at Adventureland. This is kind of a murky situation. It is technically a roller coaster, has some gravity powered sections, has some moments where it is gravity powered, but for the most part it's drive tire powered. It's like very similar to, say, Blazing, what's it called? Blazing Fury? Brain fart. Well, similar to Fire in the Hole. There we go. And I believe it's at Silver Dollar City, and I believe it's Blazing Fury at Dollywood. I could be wrong on that because I'm just having a complete brain fart right now. But the point is very similar. I do believe the Underground is relatively close to the same age as well. It's an older ride. Um, or maybe it's a little newer than those two, but still, the point still stands. It's an older ride. Um, It, I believe, is getting a refurbishment for next year, so that'll be great to see. Kind of excited for that. Not that I'll get out there more than likely, but still something to look forward to. And, you know, it definitely was a great dark ride experience. It wasn't particularly intense as a coaster, which is why it ranked so low, but it was a great dark ride experience. Definitely did what I look for in a dark ride. And yeah, it definitely was good for the dark ride um, portion of it. Now, as for the roller coaster portion, I wouldn't even say it had any force. I mean, it just kind of really, the gravity powered sections were just very slow, straightaways with some curves that weren't really. It's not like the Mummy where there's like some dark ride section and then a launch or anything crazy like that. It's, you know, to use an example of a ride with dark ride sections, it's completely just, you know, a dark ride really with some gravity powered sections. So at the number 70 spot, we have Wildcat at Frontier City. Now, Wildcat isn't particularly good either, in case you couldn't tell by the fact that it's at number 70 on a list of only 87 coasters. But the fact of the matter is, Wildcat isn't particularly that great. It's not particularly terrible either, so that's good. But, like, it was just more of a family coaster that was trying to be a thrill coaster. And I hate when a family coaster tries to be a thrill coaster because it never ends up succeeding, or rarely does it end up succeeding at being a thrill coaster. I suppose I can't count out like some of the PAX rides over in Europe. Those look like they wanted to be family coasters and they just screwed up somehow. But overall, like Wildcat is kind of a boring ride. I mean, it doesn't really have that much force. It's not really particularly intense. It definitely could use some work in that department. So that's definitely something to consider as well when riding Wildcat. At the number 69 spot is Haunted House at Camden Park. So you may have noticed a jump cut. I apologize if it wasn't smooth, but I paused the recording to continue and also get a drink of water, so my bad on that. But at number 69, we have Haunted House. Now, some argue this isn't a coaster. RCDB actually removed it from the list because it's just a gray area. But really, in all honesty, it's a coaster to me. It's gravity powered. It, I mean, what more do you need to know? It's a gravity powered dark ride. Yes, I know that's not your conventional definition of a coaster, but let's be real, it's basically the way it's done, a wild mouse coaster. that rolls a little bit more freely, not really tracked the same way. I mean, it's tracked in the middle like a dark ride would be, but like I get the fact that, you know, it's kind of a gray area. But let's face it, powered coasters are on RCDB. Why the heck is this taken off? That's what I want to know. Tell me, make it make sense. Because also to note, this was actually a pretty solid ride. I mean, it really was. It was actually really good, had some great laterals, and was an overall great experience. So, make it make sense, please. Like, make it make sense. So moving on, we have the number 68 spot, which is Cyclops at Mount Olympus. Now, Cyclops is a decent ride, don't get me wrong, but it just really didn't stack up to the other Woodies other than Pegasus at Mount Olympus. It definitely just didn't really do it for me the same way that some other coasters at the park did, like Hades or Zeus. Um, it was still decent in the back row. That drop off the kind of cliffside, or not really a cliffside, but the hill, was pretty good. Like as you can see coming up right here, this drop right here had some great ejector airtime, and overall the ride had some solid airtime, especially with it having pretty solid trains for airtime, of course. Um, so overall, I definitely enjoyed the ride. Wasn't particularly um like special or anything, but it definitely was something I enjoyed. And now moving on, at number 67, we have Wildcat at Hershey Park. So now the first of, I believe, only two defunct wooden roller coasters on this list is Wildcat at Hershey Park. Now, I thought about not considering the defunct coasters, but they do fit as an important part of my ranking, so I figured I'd include them. Obviously, this was RMC'd for this past year in 2023, so I mean, I can't believe it. We're almost to the end. But there's a good reason it was RMC'd. This ride was absolutely brutally rough. Like, I'm not joking. This thing beat you to absolute heck. So that was the first problem with it. The second problem with it was one of the weaker GCIs in terms of force. Not really any great airtime moments. Some decent lateral moments, but nothing special. So overall, like, it just disappointed in all regards. It was not as forceful as you would like it. It was definitely not Mike Boodley's best work, but it was really his first work with GCI, considering he founded the company and this was their first coaster. So, I mean, to be fair, for a prototypical concept of a twister layout, it wasn't bad. It's just, like, you could tell it was a prototype was the issue. It was very, very obvious. So, moving on to number 66, we have Judge Roy Scream. Now, the judge, as we like to call him, um, again, William Cobb. I think he was a great coaster designer who is just not great at designing coasters, if that makes any sense. And what I mean by that is basically, how do I put this? He just couldn't design a intense, forceful layout like some of the other wooden coaster designers could. I mean, I agree that there's probably some of his rides out there somewhere that are fine. But look, he even designed Anaconda at Walligator, and we all know how that ride's reputation is. I'll give you a hint, not great. So, like, the point is, like, these airtime hills gave okay floater, but I definitely could see the potential for so much more from this ride. Maybe I caught it on a slow day because a lot of the classic coaster enthusiasts do tell me that I must have because it's a great ride, yada yada yada. So I mean, I will take what they say with a grain of salt until proven otherwise. So I didn't get on Judge Roy's screen the last visit I had to the park. I don't believe. Actually, yeah, I did. Come to think of it, I did, and I had the same opinion of it. So that should tell you something about it. It just seems consistently mediocre to me. I mean, no offense to the ride or anything, or anybody who loves it, I just find it to be a mediocre ride overall. So, moving on to the number 65 spot, we have Dragon, or as it technically is called, Dragon Coaster or the Dragon Coaster. There's been a few variations of it, but the bottom line is it's called Dragon. Dragon is a very old wooden coaster from, if I recall, the 1920s. Pretty old woody, located at Rye Playland in Rye, New York, or Playland Park. Again, both names have been used. But overall, Dragon it's solid. I mean, it doesn't really have any force, but it has a pretty solid sense of speed, which is why it ranks up at 65 and not much lower. It's also relatively smooth as well, and fun fact, Coaster Pop actually rode this in his mother's stomach. Yes, his pregnant mother decided it would be a grand idea to go on a roller coaster, and this was it. He also got to ride it himself as a non-infant in the womb and thought it was alright. I mean, to be fair, since it's so forceless, it's not a terrible ride to put a pregnant woman on, I guess. If you're gonna do it, which obviously I don't recommend doing it, but if you're going to do it, I suppose this would be a halfway decent ride to do it on. Or just stick with the kiddie coaster, although some of those are more jerky and violent than these larger scale coasters, to be fair. I also liked that it was a long ride, which is something I definitely enjoyed as well. So moving on to the number 64 spot, we have Blue Streak. Now, Blue Streak is a PTC Woody from 1964 that is currently the oldest coaster operating at Cedar Point, which should go to tell you how Cedar Point does not keep things forever. That's for sure. Now, the Blue Streak is not a bad ride. It definitely has some decent airtime. Like, nothing special, but classic wooden coaster airtime. So, definitely something that is enjoyable. It's a bit on the short side, not particularly long, but it's not particularly short either. It's definitely shorter, but it's not like too short or anything like that. It's definitely not the worst ride in the world. It's not the best. That's why it ranks at 64. But I mean, it definitely offers some solid speed as well. You definitely get a great sense of speed, especially over those first two hills. That gives some solid airtime. You also get a lot of just more airtime in the front, I would say. If I had to really pick a row, it would be the front row of this ride, which a lot of classic Woodies are like that, where you get a front row ride and that's where it's at for the airtime. So it makes sense in a way. It just definitely has some airtime. It's not like some of the other rides on this list that just don't. So that's really why it ranks higher than, say, Dragon Coaster. Um, Even though it's only one spot higher. So moving on to the number 63 spot, we have Comet, the another PTC wooden coaster. This one, I believe, from the 40s, I want to say. But in any event, this one, it just doesn't do it for me. I mean, it has a great sense of speed, and the setting and the beauty of this ride is really what gave me the reason to give it the edge over Blue Streak. But to be fair, this is a lot more forceless than Blue Streak is, and it's all because of this or wait, did we already go through the moment? Hold on. I think it's up here on the ride. Is it here? I'm trying to think. No, apparently not. Okay, we must have already gone through it. But there's a trim on this ride that absolutely kills the pacing of the ride. I think without the trim, this could be a very good wooden coaster. But as it is now, it's more mediocre simply because that trim is just a killer. It's a stone cold killer. So that's really all I gotta say about that ride. At number 62, we have Timberwolf. Now, Timberwolf is a Din wooden coaster, and this one's actually quite decent. I mean, really, the top 60 of this list are really good rides. This just outside the top 60 at number 62 is a really solid ride. I mean, I really enjoy most of the wooden coasters I've ridden. Just keep that in mind as this series progresses. Um, but Timberwolf, the only reason it's so low is because of how bumpy it is. It is quite bumpy, but it actually does have some solid airtime, some decent laterals, and it's overall not a terrible ride by any stretch of the measure. I just found it to be a little bumpy for my taste, and I have a pretty high roughness tolerance, but it gave me a bit of a headache. So that's kind of really my reasoning for that overall, is just, just that headache-inducing roughness. I don't really particularly care for it. So moving on to the number 61 spot, and the final spot in this video, we have, of course, Wildcat at Lake Compounce. Now, don't get me wrong, this has a great ejector death hill, as I like to call it, and as '07 Coasters likes to call it, which I rode this with him. Or no, I didn't ride this with him. I rode this with Papa, but I rode Boulder Dash with those 7 coasters, I believe. Yeah. Anyways, what ended up happening with this ride that really disappointed me was just how bumpy it was. It just was so bumpy. It's also a pretty short ride, and you can see on the POV, this one was filmed by me. It's quite bumpy. Um, it's just not a particularly good ride, and it shows in every aspect. Alright guys, that's gonna do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please click that like button down below. And subscribe for more awesome videos from Coasterland. Until next time, peace guys.